Hi there, welcome to this special session of Reuters Next in the studio, where I have an incredible panel and we are discussing female leadership, how female leaders forge their own path, the challenges that we still face, how far we've come, how far we have to go, what we need to do to get there. So thank you very much all for joining me. We have Unilever's North America Beauty and Wellbeing CEO, Cara Sabin. Hello.
Hello.
We have Tidal Wave Head of Growth and Spark Building Group CEO, Demi Knight Clark. Hello. And NASDAQ Chief Digital Officer, Sehr Thadhani. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get into it. I want to start with you, Cara. How would you describe your leadership style? You are at the top of your game. How do you lead?
That's a great question. I would say I'm a collaborative leader. So I, generally have a very clear vision of a direction or a strategy, but I really think it's important to solicit input from my leadership team or even others within the organization. I like to take inputs from different directions and then kind of sit with it and then kind of proceed. So I really think. And I don't know about both of you, but I think it's almost natural in how women operate and the way that we work, having that collaborative approach.
Demi, what about you? What's your leadership style, and maybe how has it changed as you've learned?
Yeah, I would say bullish. I mean, I'm in a set of industries with construction and now AI, where I'm always trying to be in 3% or less women, a place where women belong, and then women have a voice, and we can't be personified by any one adjective. So I've been in construction for 20 plus years in publicly traded companies where I was one of 7 out of 7,000 women in executive leadership, and I had to do all the things in my 20s and 30s, where it was smile more, be quieter, don't speak up, definitely listen to your male mentors. And I had some amazing male mentors, but now at 46, I'm the one in the lead. So I will be the one speaking up. I will be speaking from subject matter expertise, and I will be the one that says, hey, how are we going to move the needle? Because the delta isn't changing. In my lifetime in construction, the delta has moved maybe 2%, and that's just not good enough for me at this point. So I'll be very loud about it.
So here, what about you? What's your style?
Yeah, I would say collaborative as well, but super focused. My roles in the last 10 years have always been focused on building what's new and what's next. And so I like to take people on my team and really understand for them what their vision is. Like, there's a big vision, but then really understand what their vision within that is and what they think about from an innovation perspective, what they think of new, what excites them, and then try to ladder everything up to a more collective and collaborative way of bringing things forward. Because it really does empower people to own things. So that's the way that I like to think about it.
In prepping for this panel, I was trying to think about some of the barriers that I've faced in my career. Kind of made me quite sad. I wanted to ask you, ask all of you, but we'll start with you, Sehr. What are some of the barriers that you've faced in your career, and how did you overcome them? And if you could give me some specific examples, not to make this like a job interview, but if you could give me some specifics,
Sure.
that would be great.
I've actually faced quite a lot of barriers. I was an opera singer, and that's where it started. I'm a first-generation Indian immigrant kid whose father ran a company, and he basically said, no daughter of mine is going to be a singer. But I went to music school, and I also did business. And so when I left music, it was because there was no blueprint. There was no one who looked like me. There was nobody who could sort of give any contextual, this is what a career could look like. And along the way, I've had a career where I've changed function, industry, and company every couple years. And the first 10 years of my career, I was very apologetic because people said, you have a commitment issue, what is this thing? Like, how do you go from marketing to sales to biz dev? And I don't think I had the language then. We were talking about language. I didn't have it then. But what I realized was that I'm insanely curious, and I wanted to figure out how all things went, like all the pieces fit together. And so to answer your question around, the things that I faced, it's been so much dialogue around, you can't do this. In order to get to the top, you have to do this. And so I think, in the last 5 years, I've learned that you can really build your own blueprint, and you have to, storytell, and you have to connect the dots differently. But it's hard, you know, it's hard to be a woman in business. It's hard to be a woman leading in business. There's just a lot you hear, and just separating the noise from the reality is something I think, you know, you tune in and calibrate around as time goes by.
Cara, what about you? What have been some of the biggest barriers, obstacles you've faced, and some specifics? If you...
I don't know so much if I would call it a barrier, but challenges or frustrations earlier in my career, being a woman of color, being a Black woman in an industry, the beauty industry, that is for everyone. And I definitely had moments of frustration of trying to make our industry more inclusive, truly inclusive. You know, when I joined Unilever 4 years ago, it was like I found my environment, because our Dove brand, as an example, you know, almost 20 years ago, started the campaign for real beauty. And that was very disruptive in the industry, to have a brand show real women in its campaigns. And the philosophy is that, you know, Dove believes that beauty should be a source of confidence, not anxiety. And so, you know, a lot of those frustrations of how do we make our industry truly inclusive so people can see themselves, being someone who also didn't see herself in the industry that I'm leading in. So I wouldn't say it was a barrier necessarily, but a frustration that I think many of us that are in that position have had to wrestle with.
I'm wondering, just as a follow-up to that, being a woman of color in these environments, it's been described as being an only, whether it's the only woman of color, the only woman of your race or ethnicity, maybe even the only woman sometimes as well. What impact do you think that has had in I guess, how you've presented yourself, the pressure that you've faced, or the expectations of what you should, you know, bring to the table?
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say earlier in my career, I thought I needed to assimilate and be like everyone else. And it wasn't until I stepped into my own power of being uniquely who I am that I felt I truly had greater impact, I had more success, and I had more fulfillment. So for me, it's you know, being aware that I know when I walk in many rooms, I am going to be the only or one of the few, but leaning into that instead of trying to soften that in some kind of way.
What are the barriers that you've faced, Demi? I mean, you're in a very male-dominated industry. How have you dealt with that?
You know, I'd echo a little bit of both of what these ladies have said, and I think I'd just be fascinated to hear more about their stories. But really something that I would speak to is a younger manager in my early 20s. I was lucky enough to have leadership see me, and because I had a very strong female influence in my grandmother, who was one of the first female Marines in World War II, who was a Rosie. She was extremely strong-willed, way before women really were able to have an opinion. And so I was the one that raised my hand and said, I want to run the place. When the CEO came through and did a tour with D.R. Horton Homes, I was a marketing coordinator at 23. So I was a little bolder than most, but then I realized to be the only in the room, and I'm one lived experience, I'm a white woman in construction, which is fairly normal if you are a woman, is to sit there, and then my voice was taken away from me, thinking like, oh, it's kind of cool to be the only, having only guy friends in college, or gravitating to these more male-dominated environments because I was more comfortable in them, quite frankly. But then when it took my leadership power away, when I would be on job sites and my regional president would be with me, but I was running the division, and the subcontractors would go to him and say, hey, what should I do here? I had a great ally and a mentor who said, no, you ask her. And then it was when I was a regional vice president, and I had to wait for one of 4 regional presidents to die to get the job. I mean, that was the joke, right? Was that, do you want to wait out the 20 years to get this job? And I said, no, I'm not going to do it, because I keep getting questions like, who's taking care of your kids while you're traveling? Yeah. And that's a very real thing. So I started saying to myself, one, there was the mom guilt that comes with that, that a lot of mothers face. And then the other is just, is this normal? And so that's when I really started the fight of, I want to start my own company. I went to Yale to say, I was on the job training while everyone else went to business school. I'm going to go do this for myself at age 40. My kids basically said, you're legally redhead, just like Elle was legally blonde going to Harvard. And I came out and I said, okay, now we're going to move the needle. I'm going to start a consultancy and we're going to move the needle. This is going to change and women are going to have voices.
So here, how did you navigate power structures in your industries early in your career versus later in your career? How have you changed?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think similar to what Cara was saying, I grew up moving every 3 years, and I learned how to assimilate. The first 10 years of my career, I learned how to assimilate. So I really tried to understand. And I think also there's an element of, cultural, being a first generation immigrant kid. My dad said, put your head down, do the best work that you can. If you got a 99, the question was, where's the last point? And he actively said, and he thought it was amazing advice. He said, put your head down and do great work, and when it's great, someone will tell you. And until someone tells you, don't talk about yourself. And it's interesting because the first 10 years of my career, that's what I did. And as a result, I learned everything. And I worked for so many people, even within the companies that I was in, and I understood power structures. I think it's been in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years that I learned how to jump and how to understand the structure and say, all right, I don't really care about this. But I do think you have to understand it, because to deny that there's a structure or a system in place and to just say, okay, I'm going to defy it.
Yeah.
For me, it hasn't been something that I've justified. It's like I've checked every box.
Yeah.
And then I know my way how to move around.
I'm interested in what you said about, you don't want to shout from the rooftops about what you've achieved until you've got it on paper. I'm wondering if that is, do you think as women, we maybe don't shout about our achievements enough? When people ask me what I've done, I'm so reticent to make it sound cool because I don't want to come across in a certain way, like, is that something you think about, I guess?
It hasn't
Or what
been.
would your advice be to someone who perhaps does?
I think it's in context. I think you have to learn how to talk about yourself, like we were just talking about that. You have to learn how to storytell. You have to learn how to talk about the things that you are good at. I think that you do better than anybody else. I think in a way, like the cowering is a very common thing for women. And so it's almost like, how do you actually go what feels to a place that's uncomfortable? And it's probably not. But something someone else was saying earlier is that sometimes it's not as accepted either. Like there's a lot of commentary about kids and making sure that you do all the other things. And so I think it's finding what works for you. But I think that women should shout more. And I also there's so much training for women. Here's how you be on a board. Here's how you get to the C-suite. Men don't have that.
Yeah.
And so, I think we're seeing less of it.
They're already in the boards and the
Right.
Yeah. I don't think they need training.
And so sometimes maybe shouting from the rooftops, or at least just speaking up from the rooftops, people hear it and they'll give you an opportunity.
That really resonates though, because I agree with you. I think, I was raised, put your head down, do a good job, well, do twice as better than everyone else, and you'll be fine. But because there are these structures, you quickly learn that you do have to do some self-promotion. You do have to make sure that people are aware of the impact that you have made. And it may feel uncomfortable, but you have to do it. You just have to do it.
Do you think you've changed in your career, from early career to later career, about how you are open to presenting yourself, about how you think about how you present yourself? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Were you ever concerned about how people perceived you, and how have you changed that?
Naturally, yes, naturally. And I think, I know the pandemic really was a moment of disruption for me and how I presented myself as a leader. Because you had no other option but to be your authentic self. I think many of us were dealing with so much at home with our families. There's a pandemic, and then the social justice uprising. And so when you are with your team and with your organization, I just found being my authentic self was more impactful and resonated better than me being a version of what I thought a leader should be. A leader shouldn't be vulnerable. A leader shouldn't cry. A leader shouldn't express concern. But I think it was such a unprecedented moment in our history that it really pushed us to present ourselves in a different way.
Just mentioning the pandemic there and the social justice uprisings, which you saw at the time, what are some of the more systemic, we're all talking about we need to end systemic racism, we need to end all of these things which are so built into our society. What are some of the more systemic changes that you think we need to see to get more women of color in C-suite roles, in positions of leadership, visible?
I think it's some of the things that you mentioned. There are accelerators to help prepare women to be on boards or be in the C-suite. I know within my organization there is a male leader who wanted to give up 2 of his board seats, nonprofit boards, to women of color that were in the organization. So he literally said, "I will make space for you." And so I think that's another way. But you really have to, we have to act. It's not going to organically just change.
Yeah. Demi, what would you give as advice to the next generation of female leaders, maybe girls or young women at home watching this going, oh, maybe I'm interested in that industry. Maybe I'd like to be a leader in that industry. Maybe I'd like to get into STEM or start my own not-for-profit or, get into the trades. What would your advice be?
Go for it. I mean, I think I was listening as Cara was talking, is when you asked that question, is accessibility for my industry. Girls don't get a chance, and neither do boys, quite frankly. It's gender agnostic. They don't get to pick up power tools. They don't get to pick up a welding torch. My goodness, adults don't do it. So if adults don't, then it passes down to children, and that's why we see such huge advancements in STEM, is that it's accessible to girls. And so that's a huge PowerPoint for me right now of saying, finally, after I've been kind of preaching there need to be more women in trades, I started a nonprofit called She Built the City, which is doing very well, but the needle wasn't moving fast enough for me. So now I'm saying, now we have to marry the technology that is coming with the trades of robotics, cobots, et cetera, with welding, put that into the STEM classes. We're not going to get the trades back. We're not going to get trade schools back in America, but we do have STEM classes, and we can get more girls into those STEM classes, because I'll promise you, once they get that torch or that tool in their hand, I've watched it, 99% of them stick with it. So it's all about access.
This may be a little bit left field, but how early does this training, I guess you could say, start? I'm just thinking about the way we speak to girls versus boys. We say to boys, oh, he's just rough and tumble, or we say to her, like, my mum would always say, you're not very ladylike. I'm like, what is a lady? What does that mean? Like, do you think that we are kind of encoding our kids quite early on, and that's what we see later on?
100%. I see it with my 7-year-old niece, where she loves Alex Morgan, she loves to play soccer. She's still being advertised to with algorithms that say boys' toys, girls' toys. Have we not gone away from that? I still see pink PPE, protective equipment in the field, and women wearing it. So it's kind of like, well, she's wearing a pink hard hat. That doesn't mean all of us want to wear a pink hard hat. That's not inclusivity to us. Is like, good for the girls. Like, there's just so much more that we can do. I actually said, and was working with a huge power tool company to say, let's just do green. Let's just do bright green, and say it shouldn't be about any color, quite frankly. So I think we really need to look at how we are putting our kids into one place or the other. And that's even as I look at doing classes for kids that are in welding, it's all kids that haven't gotten it. It's not just girls. So, is it inclusive to boys as well? But we definitely have coded language to girls, very young ages.
So here, there's been so many, I guess, topics which we've tried to tackle as a society when it comes to gender equity, getting equal representation on boards, or things like parental leave or menstrual leave, which some nations are considering, the Me Too movement. What do you think is the next fight for women?
It's a great question. I think the next thing to really start to see equity is to give language and give examples for both men and women to teach them how to pull other women up. I think that there are a lot of examples of men CEOs who, Cara, like you just said, will make space for women, but I think it's not something that's common. And so I think giving tools and language and making that not only acceptable, but expected. And I think also the same for women. I worked for a woman CEO who said that not much has changed in 30, 35 years. It looks like it's changed, but it hasn't changed as much. And sometimes being the only, we talked about being the only woman or the first woman, sometimes there's not really space for that only. And so the expectation for women to bring other women along, it's like, how do you do that? And teaching people how to actually pull. It's one thing to find your way into rooms, find your way onto tables, but how do you actually make it required for more women to be there. So I think that's the next 5 years.
And then a hospitable environment for it. How do you keep them there?
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible pressure to be an only or a first, and then to be cleaner, faster, stronger, better. How many of us have burned out and then had to start over and then start it again? It's just too much.
I call it active advocacy. So, you know, when there's performance evaluation sessions or what have you, excuse me, someone could be an advocate for you, think you do a great job, your name comes up, yeah, she's wonderful. That's very different from actively advocating, giving examples of why you deserve that promotion or why you deserve that assignment. So that's kind of how I think about it, is how do you imbue this active advocacy so people really are advocating.
When I talk to men in my industry who are saying like, Demi, I'm not trying to not hire women. I'm like, I know you aren't. But at the same time, make allyship a verb. Make it something where you have demonstrable activities that you, just like my regional president said for me, no, speak to her on the job site, not me, I'm not here for this, or just listen. Read the room and listen, and know what you don't know by asking questions. It's not just getting on a panel and saying, hey, it's Women in Construction Month, we support this at company X. They have to actively be involved in stepping out of the room to let a woman into the room. I'm even trying to do that as a woman who, my lived experience is white. If there are no women of color in my industry, I gotta step out of the room from once in a while. More often than not, it's men that have to do that. But so it's a very active, it's an active verb.
Fantastic. I could keep going all day. This is so fascinating. We do have to leave it there for time, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's great. Thank you.